psychedelics in a new way.
Good evening, Earth. This is Adam Sturch, broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting Young Love, Super Mario Brothers, and a suicide. Alright, I'm going to start tonight with a little shadow detailing, beginning with rendering this hand
A transformative experience for me.
a little more cleanly, and then expanding outward with the shadow color that I've mixed with a little violet, Prussian blue, alizarin crimson, and black into other portions, probably throughout the entire shadow body there, obscuring the eyes to bring them forward again. Then maybe up on the upper left hand portion on the bottle up there, and maybe a little on her figure, redo these figures with the same shadow color. And then I think we're going to make the TV glow. I'm not sure if I want to make it glow red or blue. We'll see. It might need a little blue balancing from the sheets in the upper right hand portion. We'll see. But for now, here we go with the hand.
Soon afterwards, I then got interested in Indian philosophy about the nature of consciousness, because my lectures at Cambridge, where I studied in physiology, there were lots of lectures about brains and nervous activity and stuff. But when it came to consciousness, all that happened was that one of the lecturers said, well, we won't discuss consciousness, we're mainly just interested in the brain, we leave that to the philosophers, they've got nowhere in the last 2,000 years, whereas we're getting on with the job of finding out how the brain works. So that was more or less all I'd heard about consciousness in my education. So this experience had an enormous effect on me. And it has an enormous effect on a lot of people. As you probably know, there have been a variety of surveys about the effect of taking psychedelics on people's worldview. And probably there are few things that change people's worldview so effectively. Near-death experiences do, and other intense mystical experiences, but psychedelics have a dramatic effect on many people's worldview. In a survey by Roland Griffiths in the United States of people who'd taken psychedelics, he found that before taking it, the group he was testing were mostly people in universities, physicalist or materialist views. 45% of them had materialist or physicalist views. After psychedelics, that plummeted to 16%. In a study by Davis et al., a similar kind of survey, of the people he surveyed, 28% described themselves as atheists before they had their psychedelic experience, and afterwards only about 10%. So the other surveys have shown that people who've taken psychedelics often have a greater sense of the life of nature, the sense that animals and plants are truly alive, not mere mechanisms, as mechanistic materialism tells us, and also a sense of a greater connection with nature. The studies comparing different psychedelics, the one that has the most effect on connection with nature is magic mushrooms, which is not surprising because in a sense they're the most natural of the available psychedelics. So the fact my own worldview has changed is not very surprising in the light of this research I only read about much more recently. I was just sort of average in the effects on me. And for me this led to a real interest in psychedelic research. And when I was I spent some years working in India. I worked in an agricultural institute in India. I also spent a couple of years in an ashram in South India, where I wrote my first book, A New Science of Life, about morphic resonance, about memory and nature. And I was very interested by the different views of consciousness in Indian and in Buddhist thought, because a lot of their philosophy is about the nature of consciousness, and they've taken it further than almost anyone else, partly because the long tradition of people meditating and exploring consciousness through direct experience. When my book, A New Science of Life, was published in America in 1982, it was published by a publisher in California. And so I went to California for the first time. And I was invited to the Esalen Institute in California by Stan Groff, who was a well-known, and still is alive, he's a well-known researcher on LSD and other psychedelics. He gave a month-long program at Esalen exploring the nature of consciousness, and I taught him it for the first, in my first visit there. I also, on that same visit to California, met someone who became a really close friend, Terence McKenna, who some of you will be familiar with. Terence died in the year 2000, sadly, but his voice is heard from beyond the grave on YouTube and on the internet. It's amazing how popular his talks still are. And he and I and Ralph Abraham, who was a chaos mathematician at the University of California at Santa Cruz, met every year for the next 18 years, until Terence died almost. We spent several days together every year, sometimes in England, sometimes in California, once on Terence's botanic garden in Hawaii. He had a psychedelic botanic garden in Hawaii called Botanical Dimensions. And Botanical Dimensions was full of all known tropical psychedelic plants. He was a great explorer of psychedelics and a brilliant speaker. So there are 30 or 40 of these trialogues that were recorded, and a few years ago someone found these cassettes in Ralph's garage and digitized them. They're now online. You can hear them on my website. There's a whole section on the trialogues with audio recordings. There's also a few videotape trialogues in which we explored a very wide range of topics. But Terence was, I would say, one of the leading visionaries in the whole psychedelic movement. I also went to a whole series of conferences at the Esalen Institute of leading-edge psychedelic researchers, including Sasha Shulgin, who helped redevelop MDMA, ecstasy, and a number of other similar drugs. Some of you may have seen his book PCAL, which means phenylethylamines I have known and loved. It includes MDMA. But he developed a whole range of other compounds of that kind. And the meetings were convened by something called ARUPA, the Association for the Responsible Use of Psychoactive Agents. Then, more recently, here in Britain, there's been a lot of psychedelic research at Imperial College and sponsored by the Beckley Foundation, and I'm fortunate to know many of the people involved in that. So I've been able to learn about what's going on in this field over many years. The research discoveries, now it's legal again to do research on psychedelics, include studies of their effects on the brain. One of the most obvious findings is they shut down the default mode network, those regions of the brain that are linked together that are concerned with mental chatter, discursive thought, and the internal dialogue. And that, as soon as that's shut down, you become much more present. And they also lead to connections between different brain regions that wouldn't normally be connected. It's not very surprising, really, if one's had these experiences where very unusual things can happen. And more recently, there have been a lot of studies on the therapeutic use of psychoactive substances, for example, psilocybin and its effects on chronic long-term depression and on addiction. What's interesting about these studies is that it's not the drug itself working at the purely chemical level that's helping people. And they have much more effective at relieving long-term depression than any of the standard antidepressants or talking therapies. It's not the drug itself, it's the experience it induces. It's really that sense of being connected to a greater consciousness, a kind of mystical insight that changes people. So there are some chemical companies say, well, they're going to try and make versions of these drugs that don't have these undesirable side effects of visionary states, a sense of mystical unity, etc. plus fixed chemicals. But I think if they do that, they're almost doomed to failure, because it's the experience which is what changes people. And sometimes people who've been depressed for 25 years, resistant to all known forms of therapy, after a couple of experiences with psilocybin, together with a therapist helping them integrate with this, have proved much more effective than any other treatment at changing their state. Well, psychedelics have extraordinary effects and lead to a variety of, many of them to a variety of visual effects, as many of you will know from personal experience. And also very often have a sense of connecting one with larger forms of consciousness, higher forms of consciousness. Very often have a kind of numinous quality that makes one feel one's mind is part of something vastly greater. There's a vastly greater consciousness within which all things are embedded and through which they're unified. A kind of mystical vision of connectedness. But then, you see, as soon as you realize that, as soon as you have these experiences, especially most people here, I'm sure, are either at university or been to one, the doubt kicks in. Is this real? Because we've all been educated in the physicalist, materialist worldview. It's implicit in the whole of science. It's based, the assumptions underlie almost all scientific research, all research in biology and psychology departments, and neuroscience departments. And so we've all been educated to believe that our minds are nothing but the activity of our brains. It's all inside the head. And so how can these wonderful visions possibly make sense if they're just
Alright, that's a little bit better.
disordered brain activity?
I'm going to pan out, and I'll probably do some more detailing on that hand, but I'm going to branch out with that color a little bit. It's a good translucent glaze, and I'd like to use it to balance out the rest of the shadows on the painting. So let's get it right about there. Some all around whatnot.
But if you're a physicalist, you more or less have to believe that. And not everyone who takes and changes their worldview, and under remain atheists and physicalists after taking them, because they're very strongly committed to the physicalist ideology. One example is Sam Harris, who made his whole career out of being a militant atheist. Now has a quite interesting podcast that some of you will have heard. But last year there was an episode when he talked about a mushroom experience he'd had, a psilocybin experience, which he said during the experience itself, he felt as if he was connected to vastly greater consciousness, having deep mystical insights, wonderful sense of connection with nature, and so on. And he could understand how mystics could get to that kind of position and how that could become their worldview, because he'd experienced it himself. He then said, after a couple of days of reflection, he realized that this was nothing but hallucinations produced inside his brain by the chemical disturbance caused by the drug. So he then collapsed all his experience back into the brain, and nothing but something happening inside the brain. Professor Anil Seth at this university has written about psychedelics in his very interesting book, Being You, where he puts forward, I think, the best defense there is of the materialist worldview. He's an unreconstructed materialist, but he's a liberal materialist. And of course, he has to interpret his LSD experiences in terms of nothing but changes in the brain. Luckily, he's doing interesting research on synesthesia. Many people have synesthesia. Music can lead to changing images and colours and changing colours. And many people have had synesthetic experiences with LSD and other psychedelics. I have myself. Most of us don't take things further, but he is good, and I think that his research will help illuminate what's going on in the brain when synesthesia happens. So this is valuable research. But he has to collapse it down to a materialist worldview, because as a professor at Sussex University, I suppose that's what you have to be. And so I've not met him yet. He and I are having a debate in Bergen, Norway, in December, which will be streamed online, on the mind beyond the brain. So I have no idea what will happen in our debate, because we've never met. I'm very much looking forward to it. So anyway, so not everybody who takes psychedelics and has these experiences comes to the conclusion it's telling us something profound about the nature of reality. There are quite a number of people who don't, who think it's just telling us something about the function of the brain. But most people who take them, who are not deeply committed to the materialist worldview, do think that it's telling us something very interesting about consciousness, and that's certainly my own view. And when we look at consciousness and theories of consciousness, then the basic category of types of consciousness the basic categories are quite widely agreed. There's waking consciousness, like now, seeing and perceiving the world, immersed in the world of sensory experience. Then there's dream consciousness, the kind of consciousness we have in dreams. Then there's deep sleep, where we lose the sense of ourselves and time and space, and we enter a kind of unified state. And then, even beyond that, in Hindu and Buddhist thought, there's a fourth state of consciousness, turiya, which means the fourth, which is like waking up in deep sleep and being part of a unified consciousness where we're no longer separated from everything else. And in these Eastern systems of thought, the divine consciousness is in or beyond turiya. Then there's deep sleep, which is this undifferentiated level of the ground of consciousness from which dreams and waking life emerge. And the dreams and waking life have to alternate with deep sleep, because it's all part of, it's like a wave, where deep sleep and dreams and waking life are all interrelated with each other. You can't just have one without the other. We have to sleep. And no one really knows why we have to sleep. You know, some people say the brain has to repair itself and we need to rest and recover and all that sort of thing. But I think it's very, very deeply embedded in consciousness itself, this alternation of sleep, dreams, and waking. If we ask ourselves, where can we map psychedelic experiences onto this scheme, then the most obvious possibility is that they fit more in the kind of dream type category. They're very different from waking life. And if you take them with your eyes open, then you have all sorts of perceptual distortions. With mushrooms, as many of you may find, it seems that the earth is breathing, and trees and moss, and it all seems to come to life. And when I first took LSD, I had a painting on my wall of Apollo in his chariot. Apollo just sort of took off and started sailing across the wall of the room and out beyond it. And so, but with your eyes closed, then there's a realm of visionary experience which is much more vivid than dreams, but I think different in degree rather than in kind. This is not just my own theory, it's good many other people have suggested this. So I think it's in a sense continuous with dreams. Also continuous with a whole range of other altered states of consciousness. One of it is the visionary state of consciousness, which some people have spontaneously. I mean, not all these altered states of consciousness depend on drugs. There are many other ways of entering them. And visions are, commonly reported. The Bible is full of them. For example, the book of Ezekiel contains a vision where he sees beasts in the sky with 4 heads. Then he sees huge wheels with eyes all around the rim, and wheels within the wheels, other wheels that revolve with eyes. And these are very like psychedelic visions. And the book of Revelation in the Bible, the book of Daniel, are full of visionary experiences which are like
we still got 8 minutes.
I'm not suggesting they were.
So I'm going to hit, mix up a little bit of, I think a little bit of red, and give that television a pinkish glow. Oh baby, yes, right. Dinner time is not for a few minutes.
People who stay in darkness for more than a day or so often have hallucinatory experiences, and darkness is in fact one of the simplest ways of inducing them. In Tibetan practices, some people go on 30-day dark retreats where they have an intensely visionary experience in these dark places. And I myself think that in those cave art of the 40,000 years ago, 30,000 years ago, all these caves in Spain and France and elsewhere with paintings in them, obviously they would have had to have lights and torches from flares or something to do the paintings. But they may well have had periods of retreat in total darkness in which they had visionary experiences, not unlike psychedelically induced experiences. Shamans in many cultures induce visionary experiences through drumming, and ecstatic states can be induced through drumming and through chanting and through singing, also through dancing. Then there are spontaneous mystical experiences. Many people have spontaneous experiences of a connection with a consciousness greater than their own. Sir Alistair Hardy, who was the professor of zoology at Oxford in the 1970s, set up a project to look at the natural history of mystical experiences. He got very interested in this. And as a zoologist, he thought, I think rightly, that the starting point for any investigation is natural history. So he appealed for information through newspapers and through BBC radio, and collected thousands of accounts from people about mystical experiences that occurred spontaneously. Some of them were near-death experiences. Some of them were induced by extreme physical distress. But some of them just happened naturally when people were in nature or in a beautiful place or through music or hearing great music in a cathedral or in religious services. There were a whole variety of ways in which they happened, including to people in childhood. And he was astonished to find there were so many, and later surveys showed that mystical experiences are far more common than anyone had thought. Some surveys put around 10% of the population, some even as much as 50%. And one reason this was surprising is that most people who have mystical experiences don't want to talk about it. They don't even tell their nearest and dearest, or they didn't used to, at least when Hardy was doing this. Many of them said, I'm so glad you asked, this is the first time I've ever written about this. They didn't want to talk about it because they thought if they told people they were seeing visions or having this great sense of unity and so on, that people would think they were mad and they'd be certified or sectioned or something. So they kept quiet because we live in such a deeply secular and anti-mystical culture. So these spontaneous mystical experiences, then Stangroff, when LSD was made illegal, developed what's called holotropic breathing. It's basically a form of hyperventilation which induces visionary states. I've done it myself with him, and it's very strange effect it has, but it definitely induces visionary and mystical type states of mind. So psychedelics are not the only way of reaching these other states of consciousness, all of which I think are variations on the dream state. I'm not saying they're nothing like that, but I'm saying we tap into that realm every night, whether we like it or not, through our dreams. And in our dreams, we have a dream body, we have another body in our dreams. Every night when we dream, our physical bodies lying in bed, but we all have a dream body. Theosophists and various occult philosophers talk about the astral body, which makes it sound terribly mysterious. But I think it's actually much simpler than that. We all have a dream body whenever we dream. When I dream, I can move around, I can talk to people, I can see people, I can sometimes fly. And in my dreams, there's a centre of consciousness, which is not my physical body, it's another body, a dream body. And when people have out-of-the-body experiences, then I think it's basically similar to the dream body, experiencing moving out of the body. We all experience it every night, every time we dream, even if we forget our dreams, we're experiencing it.
Alright, well that about wraps up this segment. I might do a second take on this and just continue detailing it. Might need to dry before I take it further with the hand. That's getting a little better. And I gotta feed my cat. Eidolon's about to freak out. Poor baby. Alright. But anyway, that gets a little progress done on this one for the moment. Thanks for watching. That's Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Ranch in Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting Young Love, Super Mario Brothers, and a Suicide. Have a good night.